Hello and welcome. My name is George, and my channel is all about helping you record and produce your best music in your home studio. Today we're going to be looking at all the differences between GarageBand and Logic Pro to help you decide which DAW is right for you. We'll look at all the software instruments included in each program, as well as all the audio effects included. We'll also look at some of the software specific features and also how your workflow might change depending on if you're using GarageBand or Logic Pro. So let's jump in. Okay, so let's start at the very beginning when you first open up GarageBand. You have the option of loading in 4 different track types. We have a software instrument track. So this will be to trigger sounds using a MIDI keyboard, sounds that are built into GarageBand. We have 2 different audio tracks. So just a basic audio track. So this will be to record vocals or acoustic guitar or anything using a microphone. And we have a guitar audio track. Now this is the same as a regular audio track, except that it already has a virtual guitar amp placed onto it. So this would be if you have an electric guitar and you can plug that directly into your audio interface, and you can make it sound like it's going through an amp without going the trouble of actually miking an electric guitar amp. And lastly, we have a drummer track. Now this drummer track gives you access to a collection of virtual drummers, and these drummers can allow you to quickly and easily create some great drum loops. Now if we head over to Logic quickly, here you'll see we have all the same tracks. So we have a software instrument, audio, and then a guitar or bass in this case. We didn't have the bass option in GarageBand, we just had guitar, and a drummer track as well. Now one additional track we have is an external MIDI track. So this would be if you have another synth, for example, and you want to send MIDI from Logic out to that synth so that you can trigger the sounds of your synths using MIDI within Logic. So as far as the different track types are concerned, we have almost the same options in both GarageBand and Logic. Let's go back over to GarageBand quickly, and let's start with a software instrument. So I'm going to hit Create here, and now on the left, you see our library, and this has all the instruments that are available to us. So we start with the bass, for example. You can see the different bass sounds that are available to us, and we can go down the list for drum kits, electronic drum kits, guitar, mallet instruments, orchestral, and so on and so on. And now if we go over to Logic, and we'll create a software instrument. And now to open the library in Logic, which looks very similar to the one in GarageBand, you can either hit Y on your keyboard, or you can go up to this icon right here. And same thing, if I go to bass, for example, then you'll see all the bass sounds we have available to us here. And now you'll notice in Logic, we actually have a few more than we did in GarageBand. And going back to GarageBand, if I go to bass here, you'll see we have 6 different bass presets available here. Whereas in Logic, we have 12. So we have double the amount of presets here for the bass, for example. Now, if we look at the drum kit, on the other hand, here you can see all the drum kits available to us in Logic. And if we jump over to GarageBand, we actually have all the same drum kits. So these are exactly the same as the drum kits found in Logic. So for example, if we do let's do the Motown Revisited, here you'll see the Motown Revisited kit, playing a couple notes of that. And if I go over to Logic now, and we'll go to Motown Revisited here. Exactly the same sound, exactly the same kit. Now the advantage in Logic as far as the drum kit goes is we have access to these producer kits. So if I go to producer kits, and I go to the Motown Revisited again. So now with this producer kit, if I open this up, you can see I have access to all the individual tracks on this drum kit. So this gives me a lot more flexibility when it comes to mixing and tweaking the sound of the drum kit. Back in GarageBand, I can adjust the volume of the kick, snare, toms, and cymbals, but I can't adjust the amount of EQ, compression, and reverb for each individual drum and microphone like I can when I use the producer kits. So I have a lot more options in Logic Pro when it comes to tweaking the sounds of the drum kit. Let's take a quick look at the electronic drum kit in GarageBand. So here we can see all the different kits we have available to us. Let's go ahead and load in this crate digger. And if we jump over to Logic, if we look at the electronic drum kits here you'll see we actually do have quite a few more electronic drum kits in Logic. So quite a few more options for the electronic drum kits than we do in GarageBand. But we do have a lot of the same kits. So again, for example, the crate digger kit, that's available to us in both Logic Pro and in GarageBand. Now, once again, in Logic, we have a few more options as far as tweaking goes, because we can actually open up the Drum Machine Designer, and here you can see all the different samples that are loaded in, and we can make adjustments on each one of these samples, for example. If I jump back to GarageBand, we can adjust the mix of the main samples, but we don't have access to every single one. Now, when it comes to pianos, in GarageBand, we only have the Steinway piano, whereas in Logic Pro, we have the Steinway piano as well, but we also have this Yamaha piano and then some piano and pad combinations as well. Now let's look at some of the synthesizers in Logic Pro. Let's check out our pads, for example. We can see all the different pad presets we have available. We'll jump over to GarageBand, synthesizer, pads. And now here we have quite a few available to us in GarageBand as well. Let's try this drifting away. Now this opens up this transform pad, and this allows us to tweak the sound of the synth. So if I hold down a chord, for example, you can see how that changes the sound as I change the position on this transform pad. So that gives us a little bit of flexibility as far as tweaking our sound. Now, if we go back to Logic Pro, we'll choose that same drifting away. I'll mention quickly, if you do like the simplified options that you have at the bottom here for GarageBand, you actually have the same thing in Logic Pro as well. And those are called the smart controls. So you can get that by going up here or pressing the letter B on your keyboard. So now you see I have the same transform pad. But where we can take it a step further in Logic is if I actually open up the synth itself, which is called Alchemy. Now you'll see I have that same transform pad down here, but I also have a lot more control over the overall sound. If I go to Advanced, for example, here I can change the different filters that are applied, or if I go to Effects, I can change different effects from the synths as well. But the starting sound itself from the basic preset that we loaded in is going to be exactly the same as it is in GarageBand. So again, I can play that same sound and it'll sound the same in Logic as it did in GarageBand. So the starting points are both the same for GarageBand and Logic Pro. Logic Pro just allows you to go a little bit deeper in tweaking your sound. So now that we've looked at some of the software instruments available to us in both Logic Pro and GarageBand, let's look at how audio tracks might differ. I'll start once again with GarageBand, and to create a new track, we'll just hit the plus button here, and let's go to Audio, and I'll hit Create. Now, we'll mention quickly that the quality of the audio that you record into your DAW, whether GarageBand, Logic, or any other DAW, is going to be the same. So one DAW is not going to have a higher quality sound than another. The quality of the sound that you get into your DAW, into the software, is going to be dependent on your hardware. So that is going to be your microphone, your audio interface, your preamps, and any external hardware that you have in your signal chain. So as far as audio tracks go in GarageBand, you can see I have some presets available to me here, some voice presets. So these are just going to load in some compression, some EQ, maybe some reverb and delay, depending on which preset you choose. So if we select natural vocal, for example, and if we go here to plugins, here you can see the different plugins that loaded in. So we have an EQ, our compressor, and a second EQ, which is just doing ever slight little boost in the top end there. And if we go back to our first EQ, for example, here we can change the amount with these knobs in here and dial in the frequency a little bit. Now, if we head over to Logic, I'll create an audio track again with the plus button here. First off, you'll notice we have quite a few more presets available to us. If we go to voice and natural vocal, so once again, this is the exact same preset as what we had in GarageBand. And you can see the same EQ curve here. Now, the EQ plugin that you get in Logic and GarageBand are fairly similar, as you can tell here. So this is the one in Logic Pro. Functionally, they're the same, but I find the one in Logic Pro a little bit easier to work with. And mainly because if I hover over, let's say this point right here, and say I want to narrow this band a little bit, I can just grab this and narrow it that way. And then I can either boost or cut that frequency. So it's really easy to dial in where I want to make those cuts and boosts. If we go over to GarageBand, it's very similar, but I can't grab the edges the same way that I was doing in Logic Pro. So for this, I can cut and boost the same way, but if I want to adjust the Q, how narrow the band is, then I have to go down here, and then I can dial it in that way. And then I can also change whether I'm boosting or cutting here and frequency-wise there. So it's just a little bit slower to work with, but functionally it's the same. And now while we're in GarageBand, we can look at the compressor. So if we go over to the compressor is fairly limited as far as option goes in GarageBand. You'll notice we have this one knob here, which this dials in. You'll see as we change this changes the threshold. So that's when the compressor kicks in. And it also is attached to the gain. So as I turn the compression up, it also brings the gain up to counteract the amount of gain reduction we're getting from the compressor. Now, if we go to Logic, on the other hand, and I open up the compressor, here you'll see we have a lot more options here. Here we can also change the release, which we couldn't do in GarageBand. And we also have 7 different compressor types that we can try out. So, for example, it's Platinum Digital, the Studio FET, Vintage Opto. Whereas in GarageBand, we don't have the option to switch to any of these different colors of compressors. Now, jumping back to GarageBand, let's say we want to add some reverb to our vocal here. So we do have a couple sends here. So we can add more reverb by tweaking this knob here, or a little bit of ambience. So this is just a shorter reverb. So these reverbs go to a master reverb that we have set up in GarageBand. So if we go to our track here, but that says master, and then go over to effects, first we see our master echo, and we can change this to master reverb, and we can adjust the time, color, and volume. And then if we wanted to change the ambience, these are the parameters that we can change. Now, if we go back to the track, we want to add a different reverb, but we can do that if we go under the plugins here, and we can scroll down to reverb. And you can see the different reverb plugins we have available to us. So we do have the Space Designer, which is also found in Logic Pro. But once again, we are a little bit limited into the different settings that we can change. We do, however, have a lot of the same presets. So if you do have presets that you like in Logic Pro, you can usually find the same one in GarageBand as well. Now, if we go to Logic, on the other hand, and let's load the same Space Designer on here, you'll see we have a lot more options, such as adjusting the pre-delay and the size. When we go up here, and you'll see we have a lot of the same presets, such as that drum plate that I loaded in earlier in GarageBand. So again, you can get similar starting places in both GarageBand and Logic, but Logic, once again, just lets you tweak the sound that much further. let's jump back to GarageBand quickly. While we're talking about vocals, let's look at actually recording vocals and what that might look like in each software. So starting with GarageBand, I'm just going to set up a quick loop here. So let's do 2 bars, for example. And I'm going to hit record. And you can see my voice being recorded here. And as this loops, it's going to create another track right on top of it. And now I'm on my 3rd track, and I'm just going to hit spacebar. And this created a comp track in GarageBand. So here I can select my 3 different takes, either take 2, take 1, or take 3. And let's say if I wanted to choose half a bar of one and half a bar of the other, well, then I can split this in half by going Control T. And then now I can choose this, take 2, and the first one, take 3. So that's how comp tracks work in GarageBand. And if we head over to Logic Pro now, I'm just going to do the same thing. I'll do a 2-bar loop. I'm going to hit record and record a few different takes here. So now you can once again see my voice being recorded in here, and it's going to loop and create a 2nd track, and we'll go for one more. So here's a 3rd one, and then I'll hit spacebar to stop that. And then now you can see that we have our 3 takes here. Now the beauty in Logic, so if I just zoom in here you can say take 3, take 2, take 1. So I can do it the same way that I did before and just select a different take. But now if I want to do little bits and pieces of each one, all I have to do is click and drag in there. And it's a lot quicker in Logic, where I don't have to split the region and select a different take. In Logic, I can simply just swipe, and it just makes it that much easier to select exactly what I want. So I find it much easier to work in Logic for creating vocal comps. Now let's go back to GarageBand once more, and let's look at the next track type, which is the guitar audio track. We'll hit create here. And you can see once again, we have lots of different presets to choose for our virtual guitar amps. And we can actually open up the amp designer, for example, and we can tweak our gain, bass, mids, treble. Down here, we have a few shortcuts here, such as we want to adjust the reverb and things like that. But in the actual amp designer itself, we have a bit more control once again of we can adjust the individual EQ here, our gain, and we can even change the mic position and the microphone itself. And you can also change the amp model, for example. And if we jump over to Logic and I create a guitar amp, we actually have a few more presets available to us in Logic, but the amp itself is exactly the same. So we have all the same amp models in both Logic Pro as we do in GarageBand. And again, we can change the different mic, but all the options are the same in Logic Pro as they are in GarageBand. So in GarageBand, we actually have the full feature guitar amp as we find in Logic Pro. And the same goes for the pedal board. So if I open up the pedal board in Logic Pro, you can see all the different effects that we have available to us. And if I go to GarageBand and open up the pedal board here you see we have all the same pedals available to us again. So for guitar players, you have all the same options in GarageBand as you do in Logic Pro. The only difference is there's a few more of the presets in Logic Pro, but since you're able to get access to the amp itself, then you can tweak the amp as much as you want, the same way that you would be able to do in Logic Pro. Now let's look at the last track, which is the drummer. And the drummer gives us different loops that we can try and tweak in both GarageBand and Logic Pro. And as you can see here, right now we're using Jesse, who plays funk rock. You can see up here it says Jesse is inspired by hard rock bands and funk pioneers. And if I press play, you'll hear what that sounds like. And if we jump over to Logic Pro, and if we create a drummer here, we'll go to Rock and select Jesse. So you see exactly the same drum kit and same drum pattern and exactly the same. Now, the only difference between the drummer in Logic between GarageBand is in Logic, we have this additional details button. And this just allows us to adjust some additional parameters, such as the hi-hat, so the amount that it's closed versus open. And if we want more or less ghost notes, or we can adjust the feel of the drums as well. So we don't get these options in GarageBand, but we do get everything else. So we get all the different patterns that we can change. We can turn on and off different drums, and we have the percussion elements as well. So as far as all the different track types, instruments, and effects, you can see that we have a lot of the options in GarageBand that we do in Logic Pro. The main difference being is that we can dive in a little bit deeper into Logic Pro and tweak our sounds just the way we want them. Now, functionally speaking, I'm going to show you some of the things that I much prefer in Logic Pro than I do in GarageBand. The biggest thing is having a dedicated mixer window available to us in Logic Pro. So I'll pull up the mixer, just doing that by hitting the letter X on my keyboard, or you can go up here and press this button. I'm just going to hide our library for now. So having the mixer page available, this just makes it a lot easier when it comes to mixing. I can quickly change the volume of any of my tracks. I can pan them left and right, and I can open up any of the effects on any of my tracks and quickly make changes really easily. Back in GarageBand, we don't have a dedicated mixer window. To change the volume, you use the slider on these individual tracks, and if we want to change the panning, we do like so. Now, if I want to tweak any of the effects or the EQs like I did earlier in Logic, well, then you need to select your track and then open up the smart controls. And then here, now we can open up our EQ, and now we can change our EQ. So a few more steps involved in doing that, and it's just not all nicely laid out in one place. Another thing I really like in Logic Pro is just being able to route all my tracks exactly how I want them. So if we go back over to Logic Pro, still on our mixer here, I can easily see the output of every track. So right now, all my tracks are going to my stereo output, which is this track right here. But if I want to set up buses, say set up a group for my drums, for example, I can easily do that with track stacks or just send them to their own bus. The other thing that's limited in GarageBand is using sends. For example, if I want to send multiple tracks to one reverb, I can set that up. So right now, let's say we have on bus 2, we have this space designer. So this vocal is currently getting sent to there. Now let's say I want to send my guitar to that same bus 2. Then I simply go to my send, go bus 2, and now my guitar is being sent to bus 2. In GarageBand, however, you're just limited to the master echo and the master reverb. So I have one reverb that I can use as a send and one echo or delay that I can use as a send. So I can't set up a second reverb and have that sent on multiple tracks. Same thing goes with the delay or any other plugins like that. But in Logic Pro, I have full control of the sends I want to create. I can create as many sends as I want and have as many different plugins as I want on those sends. Another thing I really miss in GarageBand is the cursor tools that we have in Logic Pro. So let's go back to Logic for a second. And if I close my mixer, so you'll notice up here, we have a whole bunch of different tools available. So for the scissors, for example, if I select those and I have those set as my command click tool, now whenever I hit command, I can quickly chop up my regions like that. If we go to GarageBand, we don't have those tools. The only tool I have is my pointer available to me, or if I hold command, I have a pencil tool, which lets me draw in different regions. The workaround in GarageBand, if I want to split something, is I put the cursor where I want to split and I go Command T, and that'll make a cut there. So that's the workaround for the scissor tool. But we still don't have all the other tools available to us in Logic, such as the marquee tool, for example, where I can just select, make a selection, and delete that selection. So these different tools we have in Logic Pro really speeds up the workflow for me. So that's something I really miss when working in GarageBand. On a similar note, another thing I miss in GarageBand is the zoom tool, which in Logic, you have a dedicated zoom tool here, but you can also quickly zoom in and out just by holding the Option key on your keyboard. And here you see the magnifying glass, and I can just click and drag and zoom in like that and quickly zoom out. Whereas in GarageBand, I don't have the ability to do that. I have to go up here and zoom in like so. One other limiting factor with GarageBand, which isn't a huge deal breaker, but it might be for some people, is that you can only record in 44.1. Now, 44.1 is still the standard for CDs and uploading songs to streaming services. Well, if you do want to record at a higher sample rate, well, you just can't do it in GarageBand right now. So I hope that gives you an idea of which software might be best for you. The great thing about it is you don't have to choose one over the other. Since GarageBand is free for all Mac users, you can jump in and use GarageBand right away. And if you find you want to dive even deeper into music production, well, then you can give Logic Pro a try. There's actually a 90-day free trial from Apple, so it's free to try as well. And one of the great things is you can seamlessly open all your GarageBand projects right into Logic Pro. So anything you've created in GarageBand, you can then bring in to Logic Pro at a later date as well. Or if you want to send off your GarageBand projects to a professional mixer who uses Logic Pro, then that's a seamless transition as well. If you have any other questions about GarageBand or Logic Pro, please feel free to leave those in the comments. And if you want to improve your workflow in Logic Pro, don't forget to download my free Logic Pro hotkey cheat sheet by following the link in the description below. I hope you enjoyed the video, and we'll see you in the next one.